Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us tonight. We have, looks like almost all of our registered attendees on, so we'll begin. Uh, Again, thank you for joining us. We have Raja, Josh, and Emily here tonight to answer questions about what our remote learning is going to look like, how we're going to maintain community, how this impacts the college process, particularly for our juniors, but also ninth and 10th grade. So we're going to begin just with Raja talking about online learning, and then you'll be able to ask questions after that. Particularly if you want to focus on academics first, that's fine, but we can jump around. What I'd like to ask you to do is at the bottom of your screen, you'll see, if you highlight your cursor down at the bottom, you'll see a chat box. And if you open that up, you can just type in questions. I will see them, answer them, or give them to one of our panelists. We will answer them as well. Our goal is to go for an hour, and we'll respect your time. Certainly, if you have individual questions for anyone here on the panel, we can answer those for you. But before we begin, I just want to say that I hope everyone is safe and healthy. Although this is a difficult and challenging time, certainly know that at Cushing we've been working hard to steer and navigate the school through this, but also, most importantly, to be sure that our student experience continues, that you have high quality virtual learning that's coming your way starting on Monday. And I'm impressed, although not surprised, with our level of faculty engagement and what our academic office, along with our faculty, have come up with to share with each of you tonight. So I'll let Raja do that, and then we'll field your questions. Raja?
Thanks, Randy. So tonight is especially exciting because it means that we're one step closer to being able to launch the plans that we've been thinking about day after day and week after week. And they've continued to evolve, but we are definitely, I know I speak for everybody within the community and especially the faculty, ready to get off the ground and to be able to see faces again and to welcome you back into our classrooms. In talking about the approach to remote learning that we've adopted, I really want to emphasize the notion that this is an approach. And so we have done a lot of retooling and reimagining about the way that we're going to proceed through the next 7 weeks, which is what we have left between Monday and when the academic year was scheduled to end. And as a community, as a collective faculty, we have really approached this as a learning opportunity to reframe the way that we are exploring teaching and learning outcomes as well. And so 2 questions that we've continued to ask ourselves. The faculty have been back participating in professional development all week, and the 2 questions that we continue to come back to asking of them is individually, what will you teach? And then to think more broadly and collectively about what will we discover in that process. And trying to imagine the answers to those questions has allowed us to re-envision very familiar staples of the way that we approach teaching and learning. The first of which is the way that we challenge and support students. The second, the tools that we will use to do so. The third, pretty pragmatically, the way that we manage and structure time, which has forced us to do a little bit of adjusting to the schedule, which I will get into in more detail later. And then lastly, how we assess or measure learning outcomes, knowing that we're not all in the same place and potentially engaging in the learning process in the same way. And so while we've continued to think about each of those components individually, all of our considerations have been driven by 3 overriding principles, and that's access, flexibility, and engagement. And so our grounding place also is in our mission, and the succinctness of Cushing's mission translates perfectly. And again, it's been a constant reminder as we've thought about different ways to proceed. And so the notion of existing for students and those core values of curiosity, creativity, and confidence, we believe that we can still deliver upon all of those, even while things will look a little bit differently. And there have been some challenges, obviously, along the way that I would like to acknowledge from the outset, to also preface some of the ways that we have tried to model curiosity in our own curiosity and creativity in our own approach. The global nature of Cushing's community is a strength by every possible angle, but in terms of thinking about what learning looks like when we have some students on the West Coast in the United States, and our population spanning all the way into Asia, and realizing that that's a 16-hour time difference that will have students engaging with the way that we are approaching learning. And so two terms that I will reference fairly frequently that have become part of our regular vocabulary at this point are synchronicity and asynchronicity. And synchronous time is time where we will be able to meet together as a community, either in the entirety of our community or in smaller groups, such as classrooms or advisories. And then thinking about the time that we are apart, that we can still accomplish those larger objectives related to community and engagement, and thinking about that time as being asynchronous, or where students are engaging in whatever the objective might be at their own pace at a slightly different time. We are still promoting all of the ideals and values that we celebrate in the Portrait of a Graduate as well. And I picked one of each of the four journeys that we talk about as being especially relevant to our current circumstances. Again, the idea of accessibility has been at the forefront of every single consideration and ultimately decision that we've made. We also understand and recognize and pride ourselves upon the neurodiversity that exists within our community as a real source of strength, and wanting to be able to come up with something that would take that into account and be able to build upon that as a strength. And then taking that idea of individuality and understanding that right now, especially in some ways more than ever, that everyone's individual situations, individual family situations look differently in terms of that immediate dynamic, in terms of access to technology, and then again, very practically in terms of the times at which students will be engaging. And so we've tried to be very deliberate about the ways that we have recorded that information and taken that into account. And that's ultimately what has made us more certain than ever about the importance of being flexible and coming up with approaches that will support students. There are expectations for students, and some of them we hope are obvious, but as we approach this as a community, these are some of the basic ideas that faculty members and advisors will be working to promote. And the first, obviously, is this importance and sense of routine. Our days look different. Time looks different. One day to the next looks somewhat similar at this point. And so being able to come up with some sort of structure to move from day to day and to move through the learning that we're asking students to do is going to be important. Communication is also going to be essential. And while our primary platforms will remain Gmail and My Cushing, we're committed to finding ways that will work for each student in each situation. Along those lines, it's going to be really important for students and families to seek out the support that they need, advisors, teachers, whoever Josh will probably talk about that, the notion of one trusted adult, whoever it is in the community that a student can reach out to and connect with to re-engage with the larger community. And as far as that looks like in terms of technology, we've also created a web or an email address within our Cushing domain, virtual classroom at cushing.org, as a way to channel all of those questions that may arise while we move from one day to the next at this point. I'm going to jump into some of the specific nuts and bolts at this point, and then I'll take a step back and do a little bit more explaining of what each of those components looks like. So along with the time challenge, one of the other challenges that we recognized early on is the way that, again, assessment looks and will need to look different in this approach. And so we've made a decision institutionally to forego final exams and instead replace them with a spring project or portfolio in each class. And to get to that final project or portfolio, that's been the beacon, so to speak, that has allowed us to reverse design 7 weeks of virtual learning, and thinking about each week as a component unto itself, where the faculty have very intentionally scaffolded learning in a way that will progress to being able to complete the spring project or portfolio. And we've also been very, very specific about the idea that week number 7 is not the time where students are compiling everything, but again, if they are progressing through the learning that teachers are asking them, that last week is just a matter of polish, of final reflection, and putting everything together. The schedule, which I will get to with a visual and in greater detail, consists around the idea that there will be 3 hours of instruction per class each week. So students that are listening, A period, B period, C period, each one of those periods will meet for 3 hours at a time for a total of 180 minutes a week. And I'll go into a little bit more detail when we get to that slide about the schedule, about how the double letter classes will collapse into the regular schedule. So again, understanding the nature of the time challenges that we're facing, and balancing the ability to have live classes where everybody who is able to can participate synchronously. Some classes will be conducted synchronously, but there'll be at least one class a week that will be necessitated to happen asynchronously. Any synchronous class will be recorded, so if a student can't make it because of a time constraint or a technology constraint or something that surfaces even that day, there will be opportunities to participate and to be able to catch up in ways that will allow them to continue to progress through the weekly module. Along those lines, students will receive a weekly engagement grade that will be measured by a series of exit tickets. And so the hope here is that students will do the work that's being asked of them on a day-by-day, week-by-week basis, and the credit or the effort that they're putting in will be recognized as credit. And thinking about that has reaffirmed our commitment to offering letter grades in every class, and so that full credits and full transcripts will look as they would in spite of the circumstances. There were many schools that considered pass-fail, but a pass-fail option. But when we thought about our individual circumstances, we realized that we really can come up with a way to fulfill what our ultimate learning outcomes that we set out and defined at the beginning of the year, and deliver upon those in ways that are, we believe, going to be more advantageous for students now, especially as they navigate some of the opportunities to come, college, NCAA, those kinds of things. We have built into the schedule standing office hours and daily access to faculty members. So at, again, any point a student feels like they need support, there will be very specific points in time where they know that somebody will be at the end of a Zoom call. But that really is consistent with our approach to learning historically and really part of the fabric of the institution of Cushing. And if a student is reaching out for help, we are going to find ways as a faculty to find the time to work with that student. Similarly, we have increased the number of advisories per each week, understanding the important role that advisors will play in this process and helping students to navigate the expectations that they're facing academically, but also really understanding the importance of connection and community and engagement. And in this uncertain time, any place that we can continue to offer a means of support, we are very invested in being able to fulfill that part of our promise and mission as well. And again, coming full circle back to that idea of access, we did our best to anticipate what students would need and ask that they took certain materials with them as they were leaving, but we realized that may not have happened and may, again, look different from situation to situation. And so as an institution, we are committed to making sure that all students have the resources that they will need to meet the expectations that are being laid out by their teachers. So that's the overview in terms of the specifics. Taking a step back out to the macro, our goal continues to be in engagement. And if we can provide intellectual stimulation and foster that sense of engagement with all aspects of what a Cushing experience is like, that remains our pledge and most important outcome that we have identified in terms of measuring success. And that also means that we need students to participate in the ways that their student or that their teachers are asking of them, and that potentially means exercising a different kind of agency in the learning process. But again, knowing that there's support along the way, and that is grounded in the structures that we have in place that are fundamental for success. As we have been working with faculty all week and in our professional development work, the mantra that we keep coming back to is the notion that none of this is going to be perfect right away. And the more important skills of knowing that there's purpose and being able to allow ourselves the patience to work through the larger goals and the process will ultimately lead for more growth in the long run. And so this has been important for faculty, but it will also be important for students and even parents along the way. So again, this idea of modular learning that's grounded in structure and an incremental approach will look like, and this will happen as soon as Monday, when students log into My Cushing, they'll be able to access each of their classes and they'll see a plan for the week. They'll know exactly when classes are meeting synchronously. They'll know exactly when classes are meeting asynchronously, and they'll have an overview of the amount of work that they're going to need to complete as well. And so that idea of structure and allowing for different ways for students to pace how they'll work through the week is really important. And again, office hours will be provided along the way so that if a student gets stuck at any point in time, there's help that's almost immediate in terms of being accessible. And again, that idea that the projects that we're working towards are confirmation of what those learning outcomes look like in each class, but week number 7 is not going to be it's not going to look a whole lot different than weeks 1 through 6 in terms of the expectations for students. We hope that doing that last reflecting, doing that last polishing will allow students to really take pride in what they're producing at the end of this journey. just to give a brief a brief idea of what that will look like. Again, my Cushing is going to be the primary location for students, the primary warehouse, and topics folder specifically. So this will mean a little bit more to any students that are participating right now, but the idea of each week living somewhere. And so it might look like this spring 2020, where every week is then outlined more specifically from there, or it might be something that's even a little bit more specific from the outset. So a week one module topics folder that then has different resources that students will need to progress through the learning of that week. But again, the idea that all of this will be structured and planned and ready at the beginning of the week, so everybody will be operating under the same set of expectations. Coming back to the idea of grading, again, we've committed to the idea of students receiving letter grades in each of their classes. And so we've tried to simplify the ways that we assess, again, understanding that traditional assessment in the form of final exams or tests or quizzes just looks different in this environment, and wanting to make sure that we have a level playing field for all students. When we have everyone on campus, we know the technology that's in their hands, we're able to set those parameters a little bit more clearly. And so re-envisioning the way that we are thinking about assessment in terms of a final portfolio means restructuring the way that we're also grading students' work. And so essentially for all year-long classes, the two components of a student's quarter grade will be the final project that will count for 15%, and then the engagement grade that will count for 10%. And thinking about the year as a whole, the fall semester counted as 50%, and we finished through midterms this spring, so that's another 25%. So we're really only looking at the final 25% divided in those two components to finish the year. And we also hope that this will be motivating for a lot of our students as well, to know that the weekly progress that they're going to make will lead to situations in which, if they're maintaining the progress and the structure that their teachers have outlined for them, that they aren't going to have to necessarily have as much of a final grade hanging in the balance going into a final exam. And so potentially being able to finish this the spring on a stronger note that then allows them to finish the year on a stronger note, and hoping that is incentive to participate and to engage. The engagement grade will be measured by exit tickets. Students will quickly learn what that means, but these are exercises that will be 5 to 10 minutes in length on average, that will need to be submitted after each class prior to the next, at the very least at the end of the week, that are opportunities for students to reflect upon the class that they just participated in, or a class that they just watched. For anyone in semester seminars, the calculation is a little bit different, but the ratio is the same. To give us a slightly better idea of what an exit ticket might look like, this is one that I created sort of hypothetically as an example for the senior seminar that I teach, in which I was envisioning a class that the majority of students were participating synchronously, and thinking about a very specific moment in time where we read a passage and talked about an idea related to that passage that is quantifiable and in many ways objective, providing a slight opportunity for reflection, and then also thinking about ways in which exit tickets will prepare for the next class at hand. So thinking about a way of closing class, or teachers being really intentional with their language in terms of what the primary objectives were for that class. A sample asynchronous exit ticket, this one I composed within my Cushing, so some will look like this. After a student has participated in the class, whether it's a virtual lab or an art demonstration, and even our art teachers of visual and performing arts are committed to finding ways to make this sort of virtual approach work for them. And at the end of any class, being able to take away some really specific ideas. So in this particular example, if I was doing a writing exercise with my AP language students, being really clear what we've called laying breadcrumbs about a moment during that presentation where I said, all right, the takeaway number one is this. And so when you have to do your exit ticket, remember this takeaway, because it's one of the three that are really important for this class. And so again, if a student does this, they will complete 3 per week and 7 in each class over the course of the time that we have left, for a 21 of total in each class. And if a student submits all 21 out of 21, they'll get 100 for that 10% component of their class. So again, something that we hope is really incentivizing to students to participate in the time and the thought that teachers are putting in right now in terms of constructing these weekly modules. This is the way that the schedule will look. Students, I think, will be able to figure out the ins and outs of it in the first day. The visual should look somewhat familiar, minus the absence of the double letter classes. And so for those double letter classes, you can see at the bottom of the schedule, there are ways to translate it that essentially amount to the double letter class defaulting to the first letter. So any AB class would meet during A period, any BC class would meet during B, any CD class during C, and that allows the double letter classes to fall back into a structure that takes into consideration the span of time in which students will be engaging with our schedule week by week, but ways that allow us collectively to move through it with some sort of semblance of togetherness. So again, each class period will meet 3 times. So whatever your A period class is would start on Monday at 10:15, and then it would meet on Tuesday. Any of these circle classes are asynchronous meeting times. And so the work done on A1 would prepare students to do work during A2. And then students would need to get that module, that work completed before class met again on Thursday. And we've given faculty members the flexibility of thinking week to week, class by class, about how to most effectively structure at that time. So it might happen occasionally where a student's class is meeting asynchronously all week. And again, a student would know that from the outset, and that would allow them to progress through the week in that particular class completely on their own period, on their own time. Again, recognizing that every single day there are office hours available to get help. And we tried to structure the asynchronous classes in places where, for domestic students, especially those in Central or Eastern Standard Time, where if a student wanted to approach their A2 class and get through it on a Tuesday, they could start working during that window of office hours. And if they got stuck at any point, they could know that a teacher would be available. So the day that looks the most unusual is Friday. And this is, again, recognizing the temporal challenge and understanding that any classes that we conducted synchronously on Friday would potentially be Saturday in Asia. And so we wanted to provide the flexibility for students to essentially move through the week, Monday through Thursday, in somewhat familiar ways. And then at the end of their last class, A3, on Thursday, their last rotation in B through G would happen asynchronously. And so thinking about how to approach any of those classes from Thursday onwards, if one class was particularly hard this week, or a place where a student needed extra support in math or writing or whatever, again, knowing that there are office hours for students to be able to reach out for help. But the idea is once we get to this point on Thursday, that students really have the entirety of the weekend to progress at their own pace. And so for those students that want to try to keep that routine on Friday, they have the flexibility to go through the order of their classes in whatever way makes sense for them and their situation. But they can also spread this work out a little bit over the weekend as well, knowing that all weekly modular work will be due, will be needed to be completed by Sunday at the end of the day in Eastern Standard Time. Lastly, again, you can see the two advisory periods that we've built in, along with some staggered start times. And so thinking about ways in which different windows of times will be accessible to different groups of students depending on where they are in the world. And then coming back full circle to that idea of additional office hours as necessary. Even at night, students will have the opportunity to reach out to their teachers and schedule those office hours if that's what they need, if that's what works best for their situation. So I'm going to move on, anticipating that there will be other schedule questions that come up, and again, believe that as students start to work through this, even within the first couple days, the places of familiar routine will settle in quickly. Given the new platform and the new format, we are keenly aware of the importance of establishing expectations about classroom etiquette and the responsibility that we have to discuss video safety. And as best practices emerge from one institution to another, everybody in the field of education is committed to these ideals and in conversation about what needs to happen in order to make the virtual learning environment as effective as possible. And again, coming back to that idea of partnership with parents as well, we want to be able to support you in the way that you're having to support students, and do all the juggling with the other aspects of your life as well. And so there are advisors are also at your disposal in terms of being able to offer help and suggestions. And then we've put together a list of resources that we continue to update, that we have found particularly effective. And these, again, come out by the day. All of our inboxes are flooded, and as we read and flag ones that are better than others, we will continue to share them. And then lastly, coming back to the notion of where all of this is going to happen in terms of literal access, the familiar tools of My Cushing being that central place to start each week and to find any resource that will be needed. And then we've experimented with a variety of video conferencing platforms, and we'll be using Zoom primarily, and we will be working with students over the next couple days to make sure that all of their needs and accounts are in order, to be able to jump right in on Monday morning to an advisory. So stay tuned for those specifics to come, as well as sort of a summary of everything that we've been talking about tonight. So that is the overview. And again, Randy, I'll turn it back over to you or others to add additional thoughts or clarify, or to jump into questions as necessary.
So as I said, when we started, the chat box at the bottom, you can put your questions in there if you do have some, and we'll get those answered either for Raja, Emily, or Josh. We've had a few come in, so I'll just get those. Raja, mostly so far academic questions. Can you talk about the differences for academic support, how that's going to work, and what the plan is going forward there?
Yes. So Jen Willis will be reaching out to academic support families as a group and then individually as necessary. But the academic support component will look a little bit different. The goal there is that there will be no asynchronous meeting times, but that for most students, the window of time and the ways in which it fits into that overarching schedule is a little bit more predictable and a little bit more consistent. But our academic support department is committed in any instance in which there needs to be different time that's identified as being more convenient, better suited to the situation. They are also approaching all of this with the mindset of flexibility and the commitment to providing the support in the unique ways that they can, having that relationship with each student individually at this point in the year, and understanding the ways in which this approach will play to strengths and then also need various levels of additional support.
Great. And then lots of questions about the exit tickets, Raja. So mostly around further explanation, maybe if you could review it one more time. And then what happens if a student answers incorrectly on an exit ticket? Is that part of the grade, or how does that impact them?
So the way that we have thought about exit tickets is they are a very brief and an objective way of assessing whether a student is engaging class by class with the material that a teacher has constructed. And so they are really designed in a way that a student would need to have participated. So the idea is that if they're completed, that students will get credit. They're not asking, it might be to repeat what the most important part of an example in a math problem was that a teacher talked about, and again, was really clear and articulate about, versus getting the right answer to that problem. And so again, the idea is that these are for most students, things that will be able to be completed as soon as the class ends in 5 to 10 minutes, that just confirm that the student engaged with the material and is potentially has certain seeds that have been planted from that individual class that will help to either make the next class more meaningful, or also at times thinking about the ways in which some of these individual ideas will combine for the ultimate portfolio or project that students are building.
And another question, Raja, about that, is it also an important, or could it be an important tool to review class content?
It is, right? So exactly. And so that's where, again, we believe that our teachers are always deliberate in the way that they're structuring class from day to day and from week to week. But this particular approach is really forcing us to think about every single class as an opportunity to work towards a very specific learning outcome. And the exercise that we did at the beginning of our week of professional development in terms of identifying those learning outcomes, and in a lot of ways reaffirming what they were when we set out at the beginning of the year. And so thinking about the best ways in which the composition of a project or a portfolio could capture those learning outcomes, and then working backwards from there and thinking about a 7-week scaffolded process in which students class by class are getting closer towards that end goal. And the engagement grade being something that is what we hope really accomplishable. As long as students are making the effort and not trying to just do homework on their own and turn it in at the end of the week, as long as they're really focused on the specifics of each class, then the exit tickets should be a really feasible 10% of a student's final grade.
Yeah, kind of the way I think about it is it's a way to keep students on track, make sure they're learning, retain the course content, kind of like virtual check-ins.
Right, exactly. And if for any reason those exit tickets start to come in, or there's something that just looks so off about them, that's giving us as close to real-time feedback as we can get in terms of reaching out and being able to assess what isn't working that could work better, or just where any disconnect is happening.
Okay, great. So there were a few about exit tickets, so we'll move on. Tell me a little bit about, I know that, when we started this process, you had a great spreadsheet that had students across 16 different time zones, and you and Josh were tracking where students were and how many in each time zone. And so sort of as we built the schedule, the extremes, right? The time zones closest to the international date line, whether they're in Japan or on the West Coast, have some times that may maybe a little bit more difficult to meet synchronously. So talk about a little bit how you're going to meet that challenge.
And so we wanted to find as many opportunities as we could, and in some ways that's where advisory has landed. And even thinking about the two different times of advisories, one being a little bit more convenient for domestic students, and the other being accessible by international students. And really Monday and Wednesday share the same structure, and then Tuesday and Thursday share the same structure, and finding different places in time where, no matter where you are in the world, that you'll be able to engage in the way that your teachers are hoping. And so one of the ways that we're going to offer as a basic expectation in terms of monitoring student engagement is to think about the window of time from 8:15 a.m. till 10 o'clock at night, which is roughly the span of a school day when we're all in the same place. And thinking about, no matter where you are in the world and time, that any activity, any class that falls within that window of 8:15 to 10 o'clock, that the expectation would be that you'd be able to participate, and that anybody who falls outside of that window would have an opportunity to participate synchronously if it's a class, or to find an alternate meeting time with a teacher or an advisor or an academic support teacher. And so again, trying to strike that balance between something that is structurally accessible for everybody, but then allows for flexibility at the same time, in terms of trying to accommodate as many individual situations as possible. And the faculty are committed to finding those times.
Okay, great. Sharing content from the slides after tonight, how's that gonna work? Sharing schedule?
We will work to come up with the best of the three recordings, and to offer that as one form, to offer the slide deck in the form of a PDF, and then to offer some further summary in terms of where questions have been asked and places that we can clarify. And that will be forthcoming this weekend.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think one of the things that worked in our favor is our spring break was a little bit later. So we were able to really spend some time on this. We had our announcement last week that the rest of the semester would be online, and with the invitation to these webinars. Raja sent a letter at the beginning of the week, sort of with the general highlights of what the remote learning program would look like. We have these three webinars that anybody really can participate in, ask questions, see the presentation. We'll take the best of the three and have it available, so you can see the presentation as many times. We'll have a PDF of the PowerPoint with the resources in a final letter that we will send, similar to Raj's first, over the weekend. That should have everybody with all of the information that they need, and so everybody's seen it a few times, so we can begin Monday morning ready to go, whether that's synchronously or asynchronously, depending on where you are. Let's see. Question I'll take: what is the current thinking about summer session? Currently, summer session is scheduled and not postponed or canceled at this time. We'll continue to evaluate that really on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, and make an announcement as we get a little bit closer.
I see one too, Randy. That's easy. From Anna, in terms of textbooks. Again, we hope that students have paperbacks with them, If they don't, we will find ways to get them in your hands, either electronically or by way of an actual book. And for textbooks, any textbook that's needed, we will send PDFs, and that's something that you don't have to worry about. That teachers have identified what they will need students to use, and in a lot of cases are coming up with problem sets and other topics folders on their own. But that is not something that you have to worry about at all. We're committed to making sure that all students have the resources that they need to be able to meet expectations.
Raja, earlier this month, the College Board sent out an announcement about what AP exams are going to look like. Do you mind talking a little bit about that? I see a couple questions in the chat about how APs will work, what they'll look like, how they'll be different.
Yes, of course. Obviously, if any of the juniors that I teach in AP language are participating, or parents, this is something that I have a very personal interest in, but we obviously have been paying attention to very closely. And the College Board's approach has actually been really reaffirming and reassuring in terms of the way that we have approached this 7-week plan that we are unveiling. The College Board has committed to providing opportunities for students to take the AP exam, and they've reformatted what that looks like. And so rather than a roughly 3-hour exam that involved multiple choice and free response questions, they have scaled it all the way back to a 45-minute free response question, and they're allowing students to take it at home. They've provided 2 dates, and so those will gradually be settled upon, but they have completely reimagine the way that they are approaching AP exams, and have approached it with the same sort of flexibility. And they've also have reduced the content being covered as well. So they are foregoing the last 25% in terms of what might be on an AP exam that students are taking. At Cushing, we have a little bit more autonomy in terms of how we approach AP curriculum, and every AP teacher understands where we might have diverged individually in terms of approach of how we've been working through curriculum versus where the AP designates that final 25%. And so again, for AP classes, that is part of the construct that's going into the week by week plan to have students ready to take those exams when they need to be ready.
Roger, a couple questions about art, class connections. Just a clarification, I think all classes will continue online. Doesn't matter what they are, correct?
Correct. Ms. Stone is also working to rethink the ways in which the really important topics that are covered in Connections can be delivered to students, but there will be some sort of weekly Connections point with her as well that fits into that overall schedule. And again, the art department they have one of the greatest challenges in terms of making this transition to remote learning, but Mr. Johnson has embraced this, and there will be opportunities for every student currently enrolled in an art class during the day to be able to continue learning in ways that will set them up to take whatever art class that they're interested in the future. And again, for any student that's taking an art class right now to fulfill as part of the fulfillment of the art requirement, they will continue to accomplish that goal as well.
Okay, a couple more academic questions, Raja, and then we get into some other for Josh and Emily. How does attendance work?
So that is really the greatest challenge in terms of this approach, and in terms of not being in the same place, being on campus together. So some of our more conventional methods of trying to promote student accountability, things like detention, no longer exist. in the same way. And so that comes back to really the holistic notion of partnership that's essential with families, and trying to come up with incentives like the engagement grade to have students participate. What we're going to be looking for is patterns, and teachers will notice it, advisors will notice, and if there are instances in which a student's participation seems to drop off, first of all, our assumption is going to be that that of good intent, and again, understanding that on any given day, attendance might be unpredictable by way of family circumstances, internet connectivity, any number of circumstances that might derail the best laid plan for that particular day. And so reaching out to students to figure out what may have happened or what didn't happen, then reaching out to parents as well, and to make sure that what we're asking is reasonable, and if it's not, to having a separate conversation about what the way things will play out from there. So this is an opportunity where we really hope that ideal of partnership will continue to exist as strongly as ever, really understanding that we have the same goals of trying to provide a meaningful close to the year for students.
Great. Josh, question about picking up belongings.
Yeah, thank you, Randy. And thank you, Raja. That's an easy question to answer, and also a difficult question to answer. It's easy in the sense of it is our plan right now that when we are able to reopen campus, for those families who are able to come to campus, we will ultimately be reaching out, and we'll set up some structure in terms of time windows for you to ultimately return to campus and collect your belongings. We know that some families and some students, that will not be possible. And so we will ultimately work with you to come up with the best plan. One of those plans for families that are unable to come to campus, for the last 2 or 3 years, we have engaged a company called Dorm Room Movers. Many boarding schools use dorm room movers. And so they are a storage company. And so they will actually, we as faculty or a trusted adult on campus will do the packing. And dorm room movers will ultimately take those items over the summer, and then they will return them at the end of the summer. And if anyone is graduating or moving on, dorm room movers can ultimately ship those items directly to you. The difficult part of this question is, we right now are taking our cues from the state of Massachusetts. And so for many of you who live in Massachusetts may be aware that we are currently under what is called a stay-at-home advisory. And I know many of the other states throughout the country are either moving to a stay-at-home advisory or a shelter-in-place. And just by some of these mandates at this time, we are having to keep campus closed until May 4th. And then after May 4th, if there's no more extension of these mandates and of these orders, that's when we can ultimately explore when families can return to campus and what that process will look like. But we're not really going to be able to make that determination until then. And even just living in New England right now, each state is even having different quarantines on each other's states, right? And so it's just something that we have to process. And once we get there, closer to when we are able to get back to a sense of normalcy and invite families back onto campus, we will be able to make those final arrangements.
Great, thank you. Question for Emily. How's the college process going to be different now, especially for our junior class, but also our rising 9th and 10th graders?
Sure, thanks, Randy. So I think the two biggest differences in the landscape right now are standardized testing and how you sort of start your research or do visits. In the past, obviously, stepping foot on campus has been a great way to get a sense of a feel for a college, and campuses are closed right now. But I still think that there's plenty of excellent ways to do initial research, and colleges are working very hard to create some pretty robust virtual programming and actually giving better access than they normally do. in terms of actually being able to speak to an admission rep or develop a relationship. So I think the investigation and sort of learning about best fits is still possible. It will just look a little bit different. And then in terms of standardized testing landscape, that's the questions we're getting the most frequently, and understandably. I think, as Raja mentioned about the College Board and APs, ACT, TOEFL, ETS, SAT, they're all being very flexible in this process, and so are colleges and universities. Many are already responding. What I mean by that, a number have already decided to be test optional for rising seniors. BU, Tufts, Case Western, the entire University of California system went test optional this week for rising seniors. So I think you're going to see responses from colleges and universities that are very in line with what students need and what they're able to do and what they're not able to do. I think if further testing gets canceled, you will see more and more colleges waive standardized testing for the upcoming year. Even some schools that haven't waived SAT and ACT entirely have waived subject tests. MIT, Yale, Penn, all of them have said, we understand testing is limited, test dates are limited, and we are going to work with students to sort of navigate this process together. So there is certainly flexibility and patience, and I know it's a process that's pretty stressful, but those sort of two terms, and I do think colleges and standardized testing agencies are going to be pretty flexible and pretty thoughtful. And there are still things that we can control, and that's what we're sort of trying to reinforce for our students and families. Your college essay you can still control, filling out the common application you can still control, accessibility to us will be there. So you can continue to talk to your college counselors who are ready to help families. So none of those timelines really have to alter. It's just how you do your research initially, and then that standardized testing landscape. And to piggyback off of Raja and the APs, tomorrow actually is when the College Board will release another update about full exam schedules for APs, how they're going to actually provide in-home testing if you didn't have access to the internet. They're hoping by tomorrow to know their answers to students with accommodations. So we encourage families to check the College Board. We'll also send out any announcement that comes our way in the college office, sort of as a recap to this webinar. And for younger, 9th and 10th, I think you still kind of focus on what you should be focusing on. Working up to potential in your classes, developing relationships with teachers, exploring passion areas that you might want to get involved with more in the upcoming years. I think for freshmen and sophomores, hopefully theirs won't be quite as affected.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Josh, what are some of the ways we're going to maintain community during this time off campus?
Yeah, so Raja had spoken a lot about our advisory periods. And so that was a really intentional move by our academic office to make sure, I know Raja had mentioned a little bit earlier of that idea of the one trusted adult. And so we are really thinking, and we're really focused on this idea of engagement. And really what we're thinking about here is how this engagement is going to extend outside of the classroom. And many of the webinars that we have been on this week, many of the students that we have talked to over the last couple of weeks, we have really seen that they're missing campus. And so we are trying to come up with as many creative ways, and also striking balance, because we know that we don't want to overwhelm. And we also know, some of these new challenges are going to be sitting in front of a screen, much like this for potentially 2 to 3 hours a day, which might be a little harder than something that we're used to. So, in terms of those engagements, we are coming up with creative ways to kind of parallel our current schedule, but also try to come up with ways of, while we are not physically together, we are still going to try to really pushing that connection. So students will see things posted in their My Cushing, also shared on community forum, such as little videos, that we're ultimately going to be doing. We are looking at the best way to try to have our assembly, and that might be some pre-recorded assemblies that we'll ultimately be putting out. Mr. Connors is putting together various trivia questions to see who's ultimately going to know Cushing the best, which there will be some bragging rights for the students there. Many of our clubs are going to continue meeting. And we're even thinking about how we might even be able to honor Tony Fisher Day, which was actually supposed to happen a week from today. So we're always looking for engagement. And if, you know, students are thinking about how else that they would like to engage with us, and also maybe their classmates as well, you know, we always will welcome those ideas, because, you know, we have a certain reality, and ultimately you have a certain reality. And some of those realities we know will be creating virtual lunches, creating just study sessions with your friends, and just thinking about how we can ultimately connect, even though that we're not physically together.
Great. And Josh, would you say that advisory time is also our main way to contact kids, talk about expectations, even though we're sending emails and messages, both in our community forum, which goes to student emails, and have been doing that over the course of the communications for the last couple of weeks. The advisor communication is a key piece for kids.
Exactly right. And I think that communication, exactly right. The communication is going to be very key. And I think it goes back to that idea of engagement as well, where actually on Monday, you know, one of the communications that will be going out. And so part of our plan is to have these webinars to kind of provide a little context. So once the schedules actually, you know, are shared with our students, you know, hopefully there is a little understanding of the why behind the what. And so, you know, we are going to start with Monday with an advisory period, and we are encouraging all of our students, you know, to find an opportunity to tune into that. And that would be a good time to answer any questions about the upcoming schedule, to answer any questions about, you know, the difference between asynchronous, synchronous, or even just to kind of process what the week will ultimately look like. And then just as we, you know, just as we move forward, I think communication and consistency are going to be two really just keys for success here, right? And we know that, you know, we know things will arise, we know things will pop up, and so please help us, you know, with that communication. If a student will miss a class, or if there start to become greater barriers. But it's our goal to have advisors check in, you know, formally at least 2 times. And if students are not meeting those 2 times in the schedule, that there will be plenty of opportunity to meet outside that schedule. And if we are not able to connect with a student at all, that's also when we're going to start reaching out to parents as well, to really create that partnership, you know, and to also think about how we can make sure that this is going to be a good experience for the next 7 weeks.
All right. Thanks, Josh. Raja, what about signing up for classes for next year? How's that going to work? Is it going to be, you know, one-on-one during office hours?
Yeah, so that will still happen virtually the same way. It's the process for returning students involves meeting with one of us in the academic office, Mr. Stone or Dr. Willis, or me, depending on the grade level that you're rising to, and we will still conduct those appointments one-on-one, and we'll find that flexibility in terms of where those windows of free time are within a student's schedule. Teachers are in the process of making their recommendations for appropriate classes for next year. We'll have all of that information, and so all of that will feel very familiar. It will just be across a screen instead of in one of our offices. And then we'll go through the process from there of retooling the master schedule as needed, and it should feel pretty familiar.
Great. And lots of questions, which I'll answer in one response regarding end of year, award ceremony, graduation. As we said last night with the seniors, you know, we know that it was when we made the decision, it's highly unlikely that graduation will be able to occur on May 23rd. You know, right now we're under the restriction that Josh spoke about, and can't gather in groups larger than 10 up until May 4th. So we don't anticipate that that would ramp up so quickly to May 23rd to include gatherings in the hundreds. So at this time, we are assessing it day by day, week by week, and we'll try to land on a date that we're pretty confident about if we can do something. If that date extends further, we're committed to doing something for the class of 2020. In terms of awards, again, that's something that, you know, we'll continue to review and assess, and of course would like to maintain as a tradition at the school. But if we can't gather, it's going to have to be on hold. How about proctor applications, Josh?
Yeah, so proctor applications, we will be reaching out probably in the second week to make sure that there are no students. So if any students would like to apply to be a proctor, that link is ultimately still open. So I'd encourage you to do that maybe over the weekend. And after we get out of the second week, we, through the Student Affairs Office, will start to reach out to those students who have applied to be proctors and start to create one-on-one or one-on-two, one-on-three Zoom calls. And so that will be our proctor interview process. And then, we'll be able to meet as dorm heads to think about proper placement for proctors for the upcoming year. And so we anticipate this to be wrapped up, by the time that the school year officially ends. In much of our student leader positions, we're thinking about class presidents, we're thinking about student government, we're also thinking about roommate process, we're thinking about roommate requests and potentially advisor change forms. We are going to be sharing this information 1 week at a time. A little work that we've done behind the scenes is that we do not want to inundate people with email, and we do not want to send all this information at once. And so one of the things that we are ultimately, will be doing is each week, at least from the Student Affairs Office, we'll be sharing very relevant information for the now, but also for next year as well, to make sure that we are being proactive, but also being reactive to our current needs. And Connections will also be a really great place for a lot of these questions, and through a lot of these for a lot of these questions to be answered too, and for a lot of these processes to ultimately occur.
Great. Same with roommate requests, Josh? Same
with roommate requests. We are looking into our system a little bit more because we know that Google is a, while many of us can use this here in the United States and, and other nations, we do know that it could be prohibitive to some of our students who are internationally. So we are looking for ways to ultimately make sure that we are kind of leveling that playing field. And some of these roommate requests will either occur through our My Cushing system, or it will occur through like Word documents. And we've been exploring how we can take pictures through your iPhones or different cell phones to ultimately create PDFs that we can print, that we can have, and we can make sure that the roommate request, the advisor change request, is kind of set in stone for the upcoming year.
Great. I don't see any other questions coming in directly, so I want to respect everybody's time for the hour. I know we're a little bit over. Thank you to all of our panelists tonight, Emily, Josh, Raja. Appreciate all of our attendees. We had over 130 at one point. Now everybody's starting to drop off, but I appreciate everyone taking the time, participating. All of your questions were fantastic, and look forward to welcoming our students back virtually on Monday. Stay safe and healthy, and we hope to welcome you back to campus as soon as we can. Thanks, everyone.